In Israel, the official day to commemorate the Holocaust is actually called Holocaust and Heroism Remembrance Day, although most people simply refer to it as Yom Ha'shoa, meaning Holocaust Day. The inclusion of the term heroism begs the question, who is a hero and what is heroism? There is no right or wrong answer to this philosophical question, but every individual and every society defines heroism in its own way. The Zionist movement, which sought to establish an independent Jewish state for the first time in 2,000 years, can be seen as a kind of rebellion against all of the stereotypes of the exiled Jew, who was perceived as weak, vulnerable, persecuted, someone who walked with his head down. The very symbols of the Zionist movement reflected power and strength, such as the roaring lion, or Aryeh, as it's called in Hebrew. In Europe, most of the Jews spoke Yiddish, the language of exile, but here in Israel we speak Hebrew, the original language of our ancestors. The symbolism of the tzabar plant, which is a hard and prickly on the outside, but sweet on the inside, has long been used as a metaphor for native-born Israelis, or an idealism of what a native-born Israeli should be. As you can see, the term sabra, in the context of this famous food brand of hummus, a staple eaten with almost every meal here in the Middle East, is a term that means very Israeli. Even the typical Jewish Ashkenazic European foods, such as matzah balls, gefilte fish, and potato latkes, were replaced here with Middle Eastern foods such as falafel. The systematic murder of some 6 million helpless Jews in Europe who had no physical means to defend themselves is especially problematic to the Zionist ethos. Here in Israel, Holocaust and Heroism Day is observed and commemorated, but I'm not sure to what extent it's really mourned. As is always the case, Jews like to argue and debate, and for every 2 Jews there are at least 3 opinions. Perhaps it's no accident that it was only in 1953, some 5 years after the founding of the State of Israel, that an officially established day was recognized and was agreed to. And the first problem is how to choose a date, because every community of Jews in Europe was affected by the Holocaust on different dates. For example, the large deportations and murder of the Hungarian Jews in Auschwitz occurred around the time of the holiday of Shavuot in the late spring. Other communities had their dates on which their communities were murdered and destroyed, and each of them argued for making Yom Ha'shoa, the day to commemorate the Holocaust, on their respective dates. But for traditional Jews, Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, has always been observed as the day of mourning for the national calamities of Jewish history, from the destruction of both of the temples in Jerusalem to the Bar Kokhba revolt, to the Spanish Inquisition, and the long list of other calamities that occurred on Tisha B'Av according to Jewish tradition. But since the Holocaust was unprecedented in magnitude, there was a certain feeling that it merited a day of its own. The Israeli rabbinate, the rabbis who represent the religious establishment in Israel, chose the 10th of Tevet, a sunrise to sunset fast in the winter, that marks the day on which the Babylonian siege of Jerusalem began some 2,600 years ago, leading to the destruction of the first temple. Among traditional Jews, still to this day, the 10th of Tevet is indeed the day when they say the Kaddish prayer, which is recited for relatives of deceased relatives, and it's recited for relatives who were killed in the Holocaust, where the date that they were killed is unknown. But for anyone present in Israel on Yom HaShoah, the highlight of the day is the 2-minute siren sounded at 10 o'clock in the morning, bringing the entire nation to a 2-minute halt. As you can see, cars literally stop in the middle of the highway, trains stop, TV and radio broadcasts are interrupted, the stock market trading ceases, as 6 million Jews in Israel stand in memory for the 6 million Jews killed in Europe who never made it here. As powerful as the experience is, many ultra-Orthodox Jews oppose this observance, claiming that it has no basis in Jewish tradition. But in order to truly understand the focus of Yom HaShoah in the modern Israeli context, let's take a trip to Kibbutz Yad Mordechai, located on the southern coast adjacent to the Gaza Strip. A kibbutz is a kind of collective settlement in which everyone contributes to the maximum of their abilities, but gets compensated based on their needs. On a kibbutz, meals are eaten as a community in large dining halls. Here, in 1943, just months after the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, the young ideological founders of this kibbutz decided to name it after the leader of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, Mordechai Anilevich. This was the first time in the Holocaust when a group of Jews decided to physically resist the massive Nazi army, even though they knew they had absolutely no chance. But instead of being led helplessly to their death, they decided that it was better to die as fighters. The bronze statue that you see was erected in 1951 by Natan Rappaport, a Holocaust survivor and world-renowned sculptor. In this statue, Mordechai Anilevich is portrayed as a tall, strong, with a determined look. He's holding a grenade in his right hand. He looks like the stereotypical Sabra, tough with his head up high. But let's stop and think. In April of 1943, Mordechai Anilevich was 24 years old, and he had been in the Warsaw Ghetto for more than 2 years, where hundreds of people died every day from diseases and starvation. The real Mordechai Anilevich certainly was famished, weak, and looked much more like a skeleton than a robust Sabra. Perhaps he had a hand grenade at a certain point. But what explains this distortion of reality? In order to understand what's going on here, we have to explain the trauma that unfolded here on this kibbutz immediately following the declaration of the creation of the State of Israel, when 5 Arab armies invaded the newly born state. Here on Kibbutz Yad Mordechai, the Egyptian army planned to conquer the kibbutz in just 3 hours and proceed northward towards Tel Aviv. But instead, 140 members of the kibbutz and 16 Palmach fighters managed to hold off the massive Egyptian army for 6 days, which was crucial to Israel's survival. During this critical time, Israel was able to form a front line and stop the Egyptian invasion next to the Arab settlement of East Dod, which became today's modern city of Ashdod. When the first Jewish state in 2,000 years was declared in Tel Aviv, no one really had time to celebrate because everyone found themselves in the middle of a war, unclear if the newly born state would survive. But the kibbutz members here, who held off the Egyptian army, drew their inspiration from the legendary Mordechai Anilevich in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. The powerful Holocaust stories that are told on Yom Ha'shoa always involve Israel in some way. For example, former President Shimon Peres, originally Shimon Persky, he changed his name to Peres to make it more Israeli, speaking at the opening Yom Ha'shoa ceremony a few years in a row, spoke about the Jewish community in his native Vishneva, Poland. Where the Nazis came into Vishneva, they gathered all of the Jews in the synagogue, locked the doors, and burned everyone alive. Those who didn't go up to Israel went up in flames, as Peres described. At the end of every Yom Ha'shoa ceremony, a variation of the same theme is always mentioned that goes something like, "Thanks to the state of Israel that we have today, the Holocaust can never repeat itself." On Yom Ha'shoa, thousands of Jewish high school students from Israel and abroad make the journey to Poland, where they visit Auschwitz, and throughout the day, live broadcasts are aired. Participants with the Israeli flag, and at a certain point the Israeli Air Force even flies over Auschwitz, march proudly with their head up high. The symbolism is very powerful. Although Hitler tried to annihilate the Jewish people, killing some 6 million, we are still alive and well, and we have built a flourishing, modern, Jewish and democratic state. Yad Vashem is the flagship Holocaust research institution and museum in Israel, in Jerusalem. Although the interior of this museum has undergone several changes over the years, the view at the end has remained the same. After spending a couple hours learning about the Holocaust with all of its horrors and complexities, visitors exit to a breathtaking view of the newly built Jerusalem neighborhood. Once again, the message is that although the Jewish people suffered an unspeakable calamity, we have returned to Jerusalem and are now rebuilding our holy city, the fulfillment of a 2,000-year-old dream. From Yom Ha'shoa, Israel's Independence Day, to the 5th of Iyar, it's only 1 week away, and blue and white ribbons and Israeli flags are all around. Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people live.